Human trafficking is the coercion, abduction, or recruitment of people for means of exploitation and profit. There are three main outcomes for the victims of human trafficking: child labor, prostitution, or forced labor. BMC Health Services research reported that it is estimated to affect 20.9 million people worldwide. The map on the left shows where the human trafficking hotspots are based on reported incidents, and the chart shows the increase in cases per year from 2007 to 2015. Both of these graphics are from the Polaris Project Statistic Report. My first story is about a woman named Mari. She was in a relationship with a man named Daryl for 16 years. In this very long relationship, they had 4 kids together. However, Daryl was abusive to Mari, and when he wanted some extra money, he would force her into having sex with other men for his profit. Daryl did not just do this to Mari, he trafficked other women as well. Mari was so scared to leave Daryl because he would constantly threaten their children's life as a result of her leaving. He was violent and treated her as his property. He did not allow for her to have a driver's license or many other basic forms of freedom. Eventually, Mari, Daryl, and another prostitute, Janice, were pulled over by a police officer. Since Daryl had both of the women's IDs in his wallet, the cop was suspicious of him. He then realized Mari and Janice had been forced into sexual slavery by Daryl after questioning all 3 of the people. Polaris Project helped them find housing and jobs, and Mari and the kids finally left Daryl. The second story is about Natalie, a 13-year-old girl who was originally from a small village in Ghana. She came to the U.S. for an education. Her parents could not afford much, so they sent her to a family in the U.S. as they promised to help her have the chance of a better life. Once she got there, the father of the house started to abuse Natalie both physically and sexually. She was then coerced and forced into doing all the domestic work in the household, like cleaning, cooking, and caring for the children. She was constantly in a state of fear because of the abuse she was facing from the man, but also exhausted because of the 18 hours of work she did every day, with no sufficient form of payment. She was not really allowed to go outside and never was enrolled in school like she had been promised by this family. She spent 6 years enslaved in this house until eventually she was severely beaten and had an opportunity to run. She made her way to a neighbor's house and then called the police. The Polaris Project got in contact with Natalie and provided her with medical attention, housing, and counseling. People who are usually affected by human trafficking have experienced substantial physical or emotional abuse prior to entering the trafficking ring. This already puts them in a subordinate position. The traffickers take advantage of children, teens, or adults and exploit them in their vulnerable states. There is a serious imbalance of power, and it all stems from our society's history of sexualizing women. Specifically in prostitution and sexual slavery, the power dynamics and marginalization of the victims is extreme. In 2015, Polaris Project statistics showed sex trafficking as the biggest portion of trafficking cases reported. Because of how many more sex trafficking cases there are than the other categories, I'm going to focus on prostitution to unpack this injustice. Women are significantly more prone to being victims of sex trafficking. If we look at the chart of demographics from 2007 to 2015, it is undeniable that women make up almost 90% of the caseload. There is a clear group of people being targeted here, and the sheer amount of female survivors there are in relation to the amount of male survivors shows how intensely women are hypersexualized in our world. This cycle of exclusion can help articulate this. It starts with the ideology that women have an innate inferiority to men and are solely useful for sexual purposes. It's a man's world. This generalization is perpetuated by women being easily taken advantage of. Sometimes men and other people in general just assume women are weaker and not as capable. This can lead to injustices like prostitution because women do not feel like they have equal dignity to a man because of the way society talks down to them. They feel like they are subordinate, and they are easily susceptible to threats, which then forces them to feel like they have to do what their traffickers or their pimp tells them to do. This chain of events internalizes sexism into our culture. We all end up victim blaming and call the prostitutes whores or sluts for being stuck in this vicious cycle. We end up seeing women as objects and sexualizing them as so, which further engraves a sexist outlook into our minds. By blaming the woman, we are contributing to this injustice. We should instead be blaming the traffickers who are so easily taking advantage of already vulnerable people. The second root cause that maintains this injustice is technology and how it helps traffickers continue to hide in the shadows. Traffickers use the deep web or the dark net to communicate with customers. This is how they so easily hide from everyone, and this is why we rarely come across the ways they operate. The dark net is 90% of the internet, which is hidden from us. It can only be accessed by downloading various different routers and bouncing your signal around, so there's a limited chance in anyone ever finding out your location. This is the most common way illegal industries like drugs, weapons, and human trafficking are still so profitable. Over a 2-year frame, traffickers spent about $250 million to post more than 60 million advertisements on the dark net, according to DARPA-funded research. DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This agency created something called the MEMEX program, which will allow for the government to advance what we are capable of accessing on the internet. It will allow us to go deeper into the dark web than we can with our standard programs. It will explore more of what is hiding in this 90% of the internet and reveal more clues to how traffickers operate. MEMEX is directly combating human trafficking, and it is trying to understand the hidden ways they can communicate through the internet. This is a quote from the DARPA page. It describes MEMEX as an index curated for the counter-trafficking domain, along with configurable interfaces for search and analysis, would enable new opportunities to uncover and defeat trafficking enterprises. The first CST I chose was Rights and Responsibilities. The USCCB website defines it as every person has a fundamental right to life and right to those things required for human decency, and duties and responsibilities to one another, to our families, and to the larger society. Our textbook says the rights that are necessary for people to be able to live are known as survival rights. These include the right to food, shelter, and a basic health care. These survival rights include such things as education, employment, a safe environment, and enough material goods to support a family. This CST relates to the issue of human trafficking because nearly all of these rights are being violated. Victims of human trafficking are displaced from family and friends and all links they have to a society or a community. As stated on the USCCB website, we have a duty to our society and to our family, and victims of human trafficking are being restricted from fulfilling this duty by the coercion of their traffickers. Also, victims are not given any education, and their only form of employment is illegal and sacrifices their own human dignity. None of these victims are in safe environments either, and they are constantly in danger and hiding in fear of exploitation. The second CST I chose was Preferential Option for the Poor and Vulnerable. Our textbook defines it as the option for the poor and the vulnerable is the choice to put the needs of society's most poor and vulnerable members first among all concerns. The USCCB website says persons in extreme necessity are entitled to take what they need from the riches of others, and the primary purpose of this special commitment to the poor is to enable them to become active participants in the life of society. It is to enable all persons to share in and contribute to the common good. The preferential option for the poor and the vulnerable relates to human trafficking because we should be allowing victims of human trafficking to be heard. We rarely listen to the victims and let them tell us what they need. We cannot make decisions regarding issues that we do not understand, and in order to make a decision that respects the human dignity of everyone, we have to put the marginalized first. It is not saying that we do whatever the poor and the vulnerable want us to do and disregard all other opinions. It is just saying we think of the victims as our primary concerns and give them what they need to heal and become active members of society again. But we cannot do this without listening to their opinions. Polaris Project is one of the biggest fighters against human trafficking. A quote from their website is, "Our comprehensive model puts victims at the center of what we do, helping survivors restore their freedom, preventing more victims, and leveraging data and technology to pursue traffickers wherever they operate." This quote perfectly embodies the CST preferential option for the poor and vulnerable, and is a perfect example of what they value as an organization. The project has a ton of supporters and partnerships with huge companies like Google, Southwest, and Newman's Own. Polaris has identified 25,000 cases of human trafficking and dealt with them appropriately, and this number is continuing to rise. Polaris has worked domestically and internationally to combat human trafficking and has led to some great progress. Polaris also has a hotline and text line where people can report incidences and talk if they are in trouble. In 2013, Google also awarded Polaris Project with the Global Impact Award. There are a ton of ways you can get involved with Polaris Project. You can donate or write letters to Congress on their behalf. You can also just follow them on their social media to stay updated with upcoming events or any new progressions they make towards their goal. However, if you want other organizations to look into, there's also the Not for Sale campaign. It was created right here in our own backyard in a small Indian restaurant in Berkeley, California, and has expanded to become an international network of projects and businesses that are created to fight exploitation. Not for Sale is also a huge contributor to the solution along with Polaris and has major attention from companies like All Saints and Alex and Annie. If you visit the Not for Sale website, there are specific ways to get involved more locally. Not for Sale reminds us that human trafficking is something that is much closer than we think. Even though it seems pretty distant, there are so many adults and children being forced into labor right here in the Bay Area.